He was just 20 years old. He wanted to have a better future, better life.
But any hopes for a happy future would come to a terrifying end.
He knew that he was in extreme danger. He's basically screaming, yelling for help.
There was a videotape that was very, very chilling.
But who could commit such an unspeakable act of betrayal?
Money, sex, drugs, power are motives for homicide. Get back at a jilted lover. That's what this was.
You have a horror movie playing out in real life.
December 21st, 2011. At 10:04 a.m. in sunny St. Petersburg, Florida, police receive a 911 call from a terrified young man.
911, it's fire or medical emergency. Man, where are you? My name is Randy Martinez. What is the address? Hello? What's the address?
It's a very short phone call because whoever it is that's pursuing him is actually trying to get into wherever he's trying to hide. He was in extreme danger at that point. You can tell based on the tone of his voice and the speed at which he was talking.
He was calling from a cell phone. He wasn't able to tell them where he was. There was no location for authorities to go off of. There was no information other than cries for help. In a situation like this, time is of the essence.
Dispatchers are able to narrow the search to a neighborhood on the north side of St. Petersburg.
Deputies are sent out to the location, walking around the houses, just checking to see if they can hear anything, if they can see anything.
It was kind of like needles in a haystack.
It took about an hour, roughly, before we actually got the exact location to check where Landy was. And that started with a phone call that we got from Landy's roommate. She had not been able to reach him after receiving some messages from Landy's current boyfriend.
She was out of the state on a vacation, and she was very concerned because she was trying to get a hold of Landy and wasn't able to do so. So she called law enforcement. She told them where Landy Martinez lived. Law enforcement then went out to that location.
It was clear that something had happened there because one of the windows was broken out and the door was open to the back of the house.
The officers enter cautiously, not knowing what they'll find.
They announce themselves, try to get some response from someone inside the house. There is no response. Eventually, they get towards the back of the house.
On the floor in the bedroom, they found Landy Martinez with 2 gunshot wounds.
They'd gotten there too late. He was already dead.
Landy Martinez was born and raised in a Cuban farming town.
They was very poor family. They don't have pretty much nothing.
His parents separated when he was really young. His father moved to Miami, Florida, and when he was 5, his father asked to bring him over.
The mom said it's okay to bring him here because it's going to be a better life and better future for him.
Landy was an immigrant, and he was always very grateful for the opportunities that he had in America. He was, someone who loved life and loved being here. He was just a good guy.
He just told me, cousin, I love this country, and I'm going to be something in this country. I'm going to be somebody.
After high school, Landy became a certified nursing assistant and got a job at an elder care facility in St. Petersburg.
Landy was living with a couple who would get up early in the morning to go to work together. They worked at the same location.
The 2 roommates, Yadira and Mia, are dear friends of Landy's. One of them worked with Landy. That's how they met. They were both CNAs.
He was very happy, not only because the money he made, he just always think on the grandma he left in Cuba. So all those old people he was helping, they was grandma.
He was amazing at his job, took care of the residents better than most people.
But while Landy excelled at work, his love life was more complicated.
We kind of figured it out in the beginning. Landy was gay. He just didn't come out right away.
Not many people knew that Landy was gay. being Cuban American, other cultures, they look down upon gay people. So it was undoubtedly difficult.
At work, nobody really cared. They didn't mind. They still loved him the same.
Comforted by his friend's support, Landy confided that he'd recently started seeing someone new. A 19-year-old named Jonathan.
Jonathan lived about an hour away up in Brooksville, Florida. He worked in the medical industry, and he had met Landy at some of the local nightclubs in Tampa, Florida, in Ybor City, and they developed a relationship.
It seemed like Landy found someone in Jonathan that was a lot like him. He was somebody else who was motivated and joyful and, just loved to live.
They'd write their names in the sand on the beach. I thought Jonathan was a perfect match for Landy.
Newly in love, 21-year-old Landy Martinez seemed to have the world at his feet. But less than a month into their romance, Landy's been gunned down in his apartment. The question is, why?
All police know at this point is he was hiding from someone when he called 911. So the question is, who wanted to kill someone like Landy Martinez?
Coming up, beneath a story of young love, investigators find a relationship driven by jealousy and obsession.
With the love triangle, with the cheating, with the video, and then the torture. This is a made-for-TV movie played out in real life.
St. Petersburg police are investigating the murder of Landy Martinez, a 21-year-old nursing assistant shot in his apartment by unknown assailants.
Landy had been shot once in the back of the head, near his left ear, and a second time in the chest.
In the bedroom where Landy's found deceased, he suffered 2 entrance wounds. We found 2 shell casings in that bedroom. They were .380 caliber. So now we're looking for a semi-automatic weapon.
Detectives immediately noticed signs of a break-in, leading them to suspect attempted robbery.
They saw broken glass near the doorway there, and it appeared to be damage to the door.
There's a television that had been taken off the wall and is now sitting on a table inside the house.
A large amount of items, computers, clothing, stacked up together near the door, which didn't appear to be normal. Perhaps someone startled them, the intruders, and the intruder shot and killed the homeowner.
They also find a trail of blood leading to one of the bathrooms.
Inside the bathroom, there's water running in there. They could see blood. They could see things like Drano sitting on the sink.
It was in total disarray. The sliding glass doors to the shower were off their tracks. So there had been some type of a struggle in that bathroom.
We found a rather large knife, a bottle of Drano. They were going to go in here and kidnap him and torture him. That was the intent when they went there.
We believe Landy heard someone attempting to enter the home, and he went to confront those people. And at that time, he was overtaken.
It was unclear why Landy's assailants hadn't simply taken the stolen items and left. But at some point, Landy broke free long enough to call 911.
He was bound by the wrist with duct tape. When he's found, the duct tape is no longer on his person, but you can see residue as well as where hair was removed. You could see the voids where the tape had been taken off. I surmise that Landy got out of his restraints at that time, obtained the phone.
When he called 911, Landy very clearly says, they are trying to kill me, or they are going to kill me. So he's insinuating that there wasn't just one person in there with him. There was clearly more than one person.
Unfortunately, the intruders had been able to break into the room before police arrived.
There's a hammer inside the scene, not far from the doorknob, which is smashed in. That's when Landy was shot in the second bedroom.
It's a terrifying scenario that leaves investigators guessing.
It's very rare to have burglars to go in and kill somebody. A burglar, wants to avoid people. People aren't doing home invasions to steal TVs and PlayStation 2s and computers. They're going in to get cash. It's not a house that you would look at and go, there's a lot of money inside that house.
The evidence of torture is especially concerning. Detectives wonder what it could mean.
Unfortunately, there's a murder almost every 3 days in the Tampa Bay area. So it becomes white noise. But because of the unique circumstances of this murder, it becomes elevated to something where people want to look at and find out about.
Detectives continue to search the crime scene and come up with two crucial pieces of evidence. The first is a cell phone they believe Landy used to call 911.
Law enforcement found that phone hidden underneath the mattress of the bed that Landy slept in.
Because we're dealing with a cell phone that we don't know who it belongs to, it took us a little bit of having to go through and get a search warrant.
Cell phone technology is amazing. It's changed the way we do police work through cell records. We're getting phone calls, duration of phone calls. We can retrieve text messages, emails, but now we can also do cell sites. But accessing these records because of subpoenas does take an extensive amount of time, especially in Pinellas County.
Detectives apply for a search warrant, but it's a process that will take several days. The second clue comes from a closer look at the window the intruders broke to get inside.
Police did walk around the property, and when we took videotape, it was obvious that that was done from the inside of the house because the glass was found on the outside. So whoever broke that glass from the inside.
That's a detail that immediately sent up red flags because whoever killed Landy got into the house another way and is trying to throw police off the scent. You have to even wonder if they meant to steal anything.
We suspect that what they attempted to do before they left was to make it look like a robbery. So they broke the glass, not realizing that they broke it from the inside.
Was it a random act of violence? Or had someone gone there intending to kill Landy Martinez?
It's still early in this investigation and anything is possible. But if it was just a robbery, then why torture him?
Coming up, when police get their search warrant, Landy's cell phone will provide some answers.
The phone actually contained the video footage of the victim where he was basically bound and tortured.
Hours after 21-year-old Landy Martinez was found shot to death in his apartment, St. Petersburg detectives are tracking down possible leads, starting with the victim's roommate, Yadara.
Landy's boyfriend, Jonathan, had called Landy's roommate to see if she had any idea where Landy was. She didn't, so she started to call Landy repeatedly. He didn't answer, so she went and checked the footage on the security cameras and found that they had been cut off. That's when she called police to do a welfare check on the home. Police wanted to interview her right away, but she was away visiting family, so they would have to wait for her to get back to Pinellas County.
In the meantime, investigators canvassed the neighborhood, hoping someone saw the intruders.
We do standard police work. We do a neighborhood canvass, and we had a lot of information about door-to-door solicitors in the neighborhood. The salesman went door-to-door and made contact with people and tried to sell them magazines and books. One neighbor did actually see the two suspects that fled on foot afterwards.
Naturally, when you see folks in the area that don't belong there, first thought is, okay, maybe these guys were involved.
Had the two salesmen actually been thieves casing the neighborhood for houses to rob? Or were they assassins looking for Landy Martinez?
The fact that the window was broken from the inside and all of the stolen items were left behind, police can't be sure what really happened here.
One of Landy's neighbors remembered the name of the company that these salesmen were working for, and they were selling magazines door to door, but it turned out that that day, the company had dispatched 30 reps to go and sell these magazines.
The next day, while officers began tracking down the people on that list, Landy's roommate Yadara returns from vacation and arrives to speak with detectives.
She was definitely emotional. You could tell she'd been crying, the puffy eyes, the head hung down. Yadira cared about Landy deeply. She knew Landy for a long period of time. They had met in school. They had worked together. They had built such a good relationship that they actually lived together in the same house, not as a couple, but, as roommates, as friends.
Yadara tells police that she and Landy usually kept in touch throughout the day. But that morning, she'd been contacted by his boyfriend Jonathan instead.
You had been trying to reach Landy, and there's some just text messages that were going on between the two that just didn't sound right. He wasn't returning or answering a phone call from him. And so he reached out to her.
They didn't live in a great part of town. It was not the safest area. So they installed a security system.
She noticed that the cameras were down, which was unusual. So she called law enforcement. She told them that she was concerned about her roommate.
Darren was extremely cooperative in this investigation and a very important part of the investigation, providing us with background information.
However, investigators are curious to know whether she's aware of any problems between Landy and Jonathan.
Landy and Jonathan had only been dating for a few weeks. I think it was 3 weeks. Landy's roommate had told police that they were very happy together, that they had seemed to fall fast for each other, but it looked like a really quick romance.
I thought he was like sweet, basically like Landy, you know, sweet, kind, caring. He seemed really genuine. Seemed like their relationship would be long-term.
The only issue Yadara can think of is Landy's ex-boyfriend, 24-year-old Jose Adame.
Landy was just starting off, you know, as openly gay and first boyfriend. Jose, in the beginning, he seemed, you know, nice, caring.
Jose and Landy met online on a dating website, and their first date was in a club in Miami, a nightclub.
Landy loved Mexican music, and he was dancing, and he had a good time with that guy.
Jose and Landy dated for several months before breaking up. Landy met Jonathan shortly after that, but Yadara says Jonathan had an irrational fear that Landy was still in love with Jose.
Jonathan was insecure. He was the beginning of a relationship. He wanted to make sure that things were over with Jose and Landy. The night before this homicide, Landy said, "Let me call Jose, you stay on the phone, and I'll show you that it's all him and it has nothing to do with me. It's all him wanting to get with me. I'm not interested in Jose, I want to be with you."
There was an exchange that happened at 1 o'clock that morning. Landy called Jose, and Landy put his current boyfriend on the phone to be able to listen to this conversation.
Jonathan is concerned that Landy is really going to go back with Jose, and he says, no, I love you, and I'll prove it to you.
Landy had told Jonathan, just be quiet, I'm not going to tell him you're on the phone, so you'll know this is the truth.
Jose was told by Landy that Landy didn't love him. Landy had a new boyfriend.
Yadara tells police Landy also asked her to listen in. According to her, the call seemed to go well.
Jose's reaction was, no big deal, no problem. I'm happy for you. I'm happy for Jonathan. I'm glad. Matter of fact, I have a new boyfriend, he said. He's given me a red Lexus. He even texted over a picture of him standing in front of a red Lexus.
But investigators wonder if perhaps one of Landy's boyfriends wasn't as happy with the situation as they pretended to be.
In most investigations, police start in, closest to the victim, and then out and out and out. Jonathan was Landy's lover. You got to look at him.
The four-way phone call in particular raised a lot of questions. Was there a reason for Jonathan to be jealous? Did he see something or know something? There's also the possibility Jose wasn't over Landy. Could this even be a case of, if I can't have you, no one can?
People commit crimes of passion all the time, whether it's a love triangle or, a jealous rage. Passion brings out intense emotions, and sometimes they're really great intense emotions, and sometimes they're the kinds of things that drive someone to murder.
Coming up, detectives learn that Jonathan and Landy's relationship wasn't all it appeared to be.
Jonathan was shocked, because just hours ago, he had told him he loved him.
None of the text messages made sense based on the conversation they just had several hours before.
Based on the details of a terrifying 911 call, as well as eyewitness accounts from neighbors, police believe they are looking for two suspects in the shooting death of 21-year-old Landy Martinez.
There were people who saw the two males who were selling magazines that were leaving the area quickly.
Could one of them be Landy's current or former boyfriend?
Well, jealousy, anger, revenge. These are all the motives for homicide.
At that point, detectives don't have a whole lot to go on, so they really want to talk to Jonathan and Jose.
As far as we knew, Jose was living in North Carolina.
Before police get a chance to talk to either of them, investigators find the magazine salesman.
They were legitimate solicitors out of a company out of California trying to sell magazine and book subscriptions. They did give a spiel that they were trying to get money to go to college.
He says his manager called him because detectives wanted to speak to him. He was one of the salesmen out in Landy's neighborhood on that day.
The magazine salesman was able to tell us what he was doing in the neighborhood, which we were able to verify by going to the attempted customers that he tried to solicit. He also had a receipt where he had purchased coffee that morning.
After speaking with the salesman, both he and the other suspected salesman's alibis are confirmed, and they are eliminated as suspects, which leaves detectives with only two options.
We had one witness that saw two Hispanic males coming from the scene. One of them could have been Jonathan or Jose Adame.
Less than 24 hours after discovering Landy's body, detectives find Jonathan 70 miles away in the town of Brooksville, Florida. He seems devastated by the news of Landy's death.
Jonathan was very upset, was genuine in his emotions. He lost a new love interest, and at such a young age, it's got to be sad for him. Jonathan actually told us that he was at work at the time.
Jonathan was Landy's lover. You got to look at him, see if he possibly, they had a love spat. You don't know what went on.
Jonathan insists he didn't have anything to do with the murder. Although they'd only been dating a month, he was deeply in love with Landy. But he said it seemed Landy might not have felt the same way.
Jose kept in contact with Landy no matter where he was, constantly calling him, texting him. Jonathan didn't know what to think at the time.
He told basically the same story as Yadara, that Landy told him he'd prove things were over with Jose, and around 1 a.m. the night before the murder, he got everyone on the phone.
If anything, the phone call gave Jonathan some closure, seeing that Landy really did not care for Jose anymore.
However, Jonathan tells detectives that the next morning, Landy sent him a series of texts saying that he changed his mind.
Landy told him, "I don't want to see you anymore. I'm still in love with Jose." Jonathan was shocked because just hours ago, he had told him he loved him. He wanted to see him again. Hope to see you soon. So he was totally caught off guard.
To Jonathan, the sudden reversal seemed suspicious.
Something had bothered him. He thought that text message didn't seem to be from Landy. And he didn't know exactly why he didn't think it was from Landy, but it bothered him. It didn't seem to be Landy's type of texting that he would normally do.
Who is sending Jonathan these text messages? Is it actually Landy? Is there something that Jonathan was involved in?
And later that same day, Landy's body was found.
As far as Jonathan was concerned, if Landy didn't send those messages, there's only one other person that could have.
He was worried that he possibly could have been target because he was Landy's boyfriend. So he had some fear for his own safety.
Investigators wonder if his suspicions are correct. Was Jose the one who sent the texts breaking up with Jonathan? Or was there something else going on?
When Jonathan received the text messages, he knew something was wrong, and Landy wouldn't answer the phone because he was calling and say, "Hey, what are you talking about?" Jonathan said it didn't make any sense, but then it made perfect sense. Jose can't answer the phone because Jonathan will realize quickly that it's not Landy.
At this point, all they have is Jonathan's account, and he seems genuine and believable, but there's also the possibility that he could be lying to implicate Jose.
There's only one way for detectives to solve the mystery. Find out which one of Landy's boyfriends had his best interests at heart, and which one wanted him dead.
I've got two detectives that are signed as case agents that were literally trying to dig up as much information as they possibly can on Jose so that they can then go to where we believe that he might be.
Coming up, detectives uncover evidence of a jilted lover with a terrifying plot for revenge.
There was a videotape that was very, very chilling. He was tied up and he was pleading for his life.
After interviewing the victim's current boyfriend, investigators are left with more questions than answers. Landy Martinez had declared his love for Jonathan, only to break up with him in a text message moments before he was killed.
The victim's not answering his phone. However, he's getting text messages back from someone in a conversation like he would normally get from the victim, which is why he was so suspicious.
Who is sending Jonathan these text messages? Is it actually Landy? Is there something that Jonathan is involved in?
Jonathan claimed to be at work at the time of the murder, so detectives call his employers to verify his alibi.
Jonathan was right where he said he was at the time.
His cell phone, which they could trace off the cell tower, and work records showed he was an hour away from the murder scene. So they quickly eliminated Jonathan as the potential killer.
With Jonathan no longer a suspect, investigators turn their attention to Landy's former lover, Jose Adame.
Since they know Jonathan's telling the truth, that means that Jose might have been the one sending the messages, which means he might have had access to Landy's phone around the time of the murder.
While detectives track down Jose, investigators contact Gail Rigg, one of Landy's oldest friends, to find out what she can tell them about his relationship with Jose.
Gail was a wealth of information for us, for Landy's background, for Jose's background, for Jose's behavior.
Gail tells detectives that things couldn't have started out better between Landy and Jose. In fact, they'd only been dating a short time when they decided to move in together.
They lived in an apartment, little one-bedroom, really cute apartment. Used to go over there every now and then, hang out, birthday parties. Relationship seemed really good. He seemed really happy. Jose seemed happy.
But according to Gail, Landy soon began to realize there was a darker side to Jose.
We got invited to go swim in their pool, so I brought my son with me, and Jose made a comment that I didn't like. My son was like 11, maybe 12 at the time. My gut feeling just wasn't there.
Jose had offered to smoke marijuana with the young child and show him pornographic movies.
It was an inappropriate comment, and she just didn't trust Jose from that point on around her son. She warned Landy about Jose's jealous behaviors. He would get mad at little things, that weren't reasonable.
I talked to Landy about it. He confronted Jose, corrected him, hey, that's not right type thing.
Over the next few months, the relationship continued to sour.
The things start change when he became, the jealous of things, and it was because he didn't do nothing for his life. But my cousin Landy, he was doing something for his life.
Landy had ambition and wanted to help people. He was working towards those goals, but Jose seemed lost.
It was meeting Jonathan that had finally made Landy decide to end his relationship with Jose.
He instantly was smitten by Jonathan. Things were not going well with Jose anyway, and he wanted to get into this new relationship. So he told Jonathan, "You're my guy." And then had to tell Jose, "You're not."
They both moved out of the apartment, and Jose moved back to North Carolina to be with family. Jose didn't take the breakup very well, and so when he found out that Landy had already moved on, he lashed out.
Jose was possessive, jealous. He went so far as to take the vehicle that actually belonged to Landy. It was in Landy's name. And he'd drive through the stoplights, the traffic lights that were monitored by cameras, and photos would be taken, and he would be raising his middle finger.
Jose was trying to emotionally hurt Landy, hey, here, I'm going to do this to get you back type thing. All the tickets would go to Landy.
The tickets continued to pile up, and Landy was responsible for paying the fines. So he decided to do something about it.
Landy had enough. He made a phone call to Jose, lured Jose back here to St. Petersburg. Said he wanted to get back together. He missed him. He made a mistake.
Landy says, "Let's meet." Jose thinks they're getting back together.
Jose drove down in the car, met him at a fast food restaurant in the parking lot. Waiting for him was Landy and law enforcement. At that time, the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office determined the rightful owner of the vehicle was Landy Martinez.
He's been tricked. He thought he was getting back together with Landy, and now he's lost his ride.
Landy took the vehicle and went back to his residence, leaving Jose there in the parking lot with some luggage, some clothing, and no transportation.
Gail's story puts Landy's murder in a whole new light.
There were a number of reasons why Jose didn't initially seem like a strong suspect. First, he didn't live in Florida anymore. And second, Jonathan and Yadara said they were on the phone the night before the murder with Jose, and he told them he was seeing someone new.
It appears that in setting up Jose, Landy Martinez had made an extremely dangerous enemy.
Jose was mean, a little crazy, maybe slightly psychotic. The stuff he was trying to pull and being mean to Landy all the way around.
Jose is just crazed with this, and the rage just comes out. That's what pushed him over the edge when he finds out that he's been duped again, and now he wants revenge.
Anyone might want revenge after a bad breakup, but after learning more about Jose, it's not hard to imagine him taking it too far.
While the search for Jose continues, investigators finally gain access to Landy's phone. What they find is shocking.
We're able to use a program that we have to search the contents of the phone. That's when we realized that there was actually video footage of the victim inside the bathroom of the house where he was basically bound and tortured.
It was a videotape that was very, very chilling. It was Landy Martinez, and he was crying out in Spanish. He was tied up, he was wet, the shower was running, and he was pleading for his life.
Investigators realize he's being forced to confirm his breakup with Jonathan.
He was being videotaped to record a statement that he was no longer in love with his current boyfriend.
He was blaming himself for everything that had occurred, and Jose was a great guy, and Jose had nothing to do with this, and I'm all at fault, it's my fault.
It's never easy to watch somebody suffer, but watching someone beg for their life is horrible. It was disgusting.
Whoever was filming Landy was doing it out of hate, out of spite, and was torturing him.
And at this point, it seems obvious who the person holding the camera must be.
And he was using a Spanish term called papi. And we later learned that that was a term of endearment that Landy had used towards Jose.
Coming up, detectives believe Jose Adame is their murderer. Now they just have to catch him.
We're using the U.S. Marshal's Office to try to help us locate him.
At that point, it was anybody's guess. He could have been anywhere.
After a week of investigation, St. Petersburg police have zeroed in on a suspect in the murder of Landy Martinez, his ex-boyfriend Jose Adame, who they believe tortured and killed him out of jealousy and revenge.
Jose had the motive, but it was the video on Landy's phone that convinced them that he was the one who did this.
Someone else was there filming it. Landy did make reference to Jose. And why would Landy be taking the blame for the fault in the relationship?
There's absolutely no reason why you would say something like that unless the person holding the cell phone recording you is compelling you to say that.
On December 27th, 2011, Catawba County Police finally catch up with Jose.
He was staying with his mother in a trailer in Hickory, North Carolina.
They took him into custody for us, and then our detectives met him at the county jail up there to try to do an interview of him there. The initial response that they got was a total denial, basically saying that he had not been down in that area.
Since you've been back to North Carolina on the 17th, you have not been back to Florida. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Your phone that you're using is in Pinellas County, Florida, Tuesday and Wednesday. So you're going to have to explain that to us.
We were able to determine that at the time of the killing, his phone was in close proximity to Landy Martinez's home.
At that point, the investigator plays the 911 call for Jose.
After being able to point out some very crucial evidence that they had to him, at that point, he got nauseous.
Hello?
began to press and try to get him to tell them exactly what happened, they received a telephone call from someone representing themselves as being his attorney, and they had to end the interview.
Jose isn't talking, but when detectives execute a search warrant on his sister's home, they come up with a final and conclusive piece of evidence.
We were able to obtain blood out of that vehicle, blood that was identified as belonging to Landy Martinez.
They also find out the name of the person seen leaving Landy's neighborhood with Jose the day he was killed.
Witnesses identified Jose's nephew, Leo, the young 16-year-old boy, as having been with Jose on the 20th and 21st of December. Once we found out who Leo was, we returned to North Carolina and tried to make contact with Leo, but Leo wasn't to be found. We feel that Leo probably went back to Mexico, or at least was hiding out. And throughout the whole period of time, Jose Adame always denied the crime, so he never provided us information concerning Leo or Leo's involvement.
4 months after the crime, on April 14th, 2012, Jose Adame is indicted for the murder of Landy Martinez. More than 4 years later, after delays in preparing the case and gathering witnesses, his trial finally begins in July of 2016. Prosecutors are confident once the jury hears the details of his heinous crime, they will have no trouble finding him guilty.
Jose thought he got the raw end of the deal when he and Landy broke up, so he planned the robbery to get back at him. So all those bags that police found stacked up against the door were filled with items that he probably had every intention of taking.
The night before the robbery, Landy added insult to injury by subjecting him to more humiliation in front of Jonathan and Yadara.
Being confronted on this three-way phone call that they had at 1 o'clock in the morning, being told, I don't want anything to do with you anymore. These are the things that we believe that pushed him over the edge.
So instead of just going in and robbing Landy, they tied him up, they tortured him, and they executed him.
We surmised that while they ransacked the home, they were going from room to room, packing things in pillowcases and duffel bags. Landy got out of his restraints at that time, obtained the phone. He's making the 911 call, he's chased, and he's shot, he's killed.
Jose's phone records help prove he and his cousin were the men neighbors saw fleeing the area.
After the shooting, his phone immediately traveled outside of Pinellas County, over the bridge, into Tampa, I-75, on up to North Carolina.
Instead of claiming that Jose is innocent, the defense tries to raise doubt by pinning the blame on his 16-year-old nephew, Leo.
They finally admitted that Jose was inside the house, but Jose had nothing to do with the killing. It was all Leo.
It was a last-second admittance to being at the scene of the crime, saying that there was someone else there, the 16-year-old who had never met the man that he allegedly murdered.
After a 5-day trial, the jury returns its verdict. They find Jose Adame guilty of first-degree murder. He is sentenced to life in prison.
The physical evidence that we had at the scene contained in that cell phone with that video footage, and then the blood evidence that was found inside his sister's car. You get cases with evidence, but that much evidence just keep coming and coming. It's rare that you have that type of case.
For Landy's friends and family, the victory is bittersweet.
If this didn't happen to Landy, I think he probably would have moved on to maybe a nurse or, doctor or something, married Jonathan or found another love of his life and just had a family.
To do those kind of things, you need to be able. You need to have the devil inside of you. Jose, he deserved to be dead because he killed part of my heart too.
He was a beloved father working hard to provide for his family.
He was a family man. He was a good guy.
He was a very doting parent. He had settled in as a typical suburban father.
Until a cold-blooded assassin descended on a local gas station.
It was so brutal. It literally was just done with no regard for this man's life.
We had a rather big whodunit.
You got a guy with a hot temper. Who did he piss off?
The investigation would take detectives into the upper echelons of wealthy Ohio society to catch a killer out for revenge.
Are they going to retaliate against me? This is scary.
Saturday, June 16th, 2001. It's a busy weekend in the quiet Midwestern town of Akron, Ohio.
It's a suburban area, really, with these large, sprawling homes, lots of acreage. And, you know, it has its strip malls, it has its suburban communities.
It was Father's Day weekend and quite crowded. There was a lot of traffic.
Then suddenly, a shot rings out amidst the crowd of shoppers.
Emergency.
I need immediate help. We have gunshot wound at BJ's Wholesale Club. He's got a gunshot wound to his face. He's bleeding profusely.
Is he conscious?
He barely.
The incident occurred at a warehouse club at their gas station, so a public area. And here you have a person pulling up in a motorcycle and shooting one shot.
It was just like so nonchalant. It wasn't at night. It wasn't sneaky.
There were several people who witnessed it, but the person was wearing a helmet and a mask so that he could not be identified.
The assassin's target is a man sitting alone in an SUV. By the time police arrive, he is already dead. The victim is identified as 44-year-old local businessman, Jeff Zack.
What went through my mind, I was wondering who would do something like this and hurt his family like this.
Before settling down in Akron, Jeff Zack had grown up in another Rust Belt town, Detroit, Michigan.
Jeff Zack was born in 1957, and from what I understand, he was abandoned by his birth father.
The divorce was very hard on my children. In those years, it was very unusual to get divorced, and it was just very hard.
Jeff Zack was fortunate in that his mother remarried, and he had a stepfather who was apparently quite prominent in his life and took a good deal of interest in him.
He was my firstborn child, my firstborn son. He was very smart, very vivacious, very interesting kid.
Jeff's parents encouraged him to pursue his dreams. So in his early 20s, he decided to leave his hometown behind.
Jeff Zack decided to branch out and see the world. He traveled to Israel. Most people of Jewish ancestry have automatic dual citizenship over there.
He joined the IDF, which is the army for Israel. He wanted to become a pilot, but he didn't quite qualify.
He couldn't become what he wanted to become. He had to join the Air Force and become a paratrooper for the Israeli Air Force. But he learned how to speak Hebrew fluently, plus a lot of Arabic and a lot of other languages.
But after completing his tour of duty, Jeff struggled to settle back into civilian life in the United States.
He had the kind of personality that alienated a lot of people. He could be successful at times, but he had an abrasive attitude.
He was this big, kind of in-your-face type of guy. You know, you didn't want to piss Jeff Zack off.
He was trying to be rich. He did whatever he had to do to survive.
Until one day, Jeff met the woman who would change his life forever.
Bonnie and Jeff met in Arizona in 1986. And they fell madly in love, and they kind of just ran away together. They were quickly married afterwards.
Before long, they had a child together.
Brian was born after a few years, so they were ecstatic, and he has always been the sweetest, most darling child. And they lived in San Diego for a couple of years. And then they decided to move back to Akron. Her parents lived in Akron, and they thought they could do better there and would have family there.
They lived in a single-family dwelling in a nice area called Stowe, which is a suburb of Akron.
When I think about Jeff, I think of him as like a family man, a person I was proud to meet, and he loved his son.
He was a very doting parent. He was very involved in his son's life.
But Jeff would never get the chance to see his son grow up. Now he's been gunned down in cold blood by an unknown assailant, and Akron police want to know why.
He was a great father, and he was a husband. And he was murdered in broad daylight. It just didn't make sense.
Brian was 12 and a half when Jeffrey was murdered. So mean. Right before Father's Day.
I never just couldn't get it, on why, who would do something like this to him.
Coming up, was Jeff Zack the family man he appeared to be?
He liked to talk to women, and sometimes that got him in trouble.
"44-year-old Jeff Zack has been murdered outside a busy shopping center in the suburbs of Akron. As detectives speak to witnesses at the scene, they are stunned by the brazenness of the attack.
Mr. Zack pulled into a gas station, and an individual came up on a motorcycle, stopped, shot Mr. Zack in the face.
He did this during daylight, which is, he had a lot of nerve.
The killer had been careful to cover his tracks. Investigators managed to find only one piece of evidence.
A projectile was found at the scene about 100 yards from the vehicle that Jeff Zack was in. That was a good find, but there was nothing really to compare it with.
And although the shooting occurred in public, no one is able to provide a clear description.
The shooting happened so quickly that no one really had the time to get a good look at the perpetrator.
That person wore dark clothing and a motorcycle helmet with full darkened face mask, so the face couldn't be seen.
However, witnesses did get a good look at the killer's motorcycle.
It was a ninja-style motorcycle. They call them crotch rockets.
It was like a racing motorcycle, one that the witnesses said was built for high speed.
It was one of those bikes that you lay forward on, and it has high horsepower. It was black and white, trimmed in green, like a fluorescent or a candy apple green.
Investigators issue an alert, but without a license plate number, they know the chances of finding it are slim.
Even though this murder took place on Father's Day weekend in a crowded parking lot on a shopping day, the police really didn't have much to go on.
What do you have, really? You have this shadowy figure who pulls in, commits a murder, and drives away. Nothing else.
No one seems to have any idea who might want to kill Jeff, but his wife, Bonnie, is able to give detectives a promising lead.
Shortly before his murder, there was a phone call to the resident indicating that you have one more chance to get out of this. And Bonnie told Jeff about that phone call, and he was very nervous about it.
At the job sites, he would tell me that he was getting a phone call, and I'd be like, Jeff, just don't worry about it. Don't get stressed out. Just let's get the job done. And I never knew it would just end up to the situation that it ended up to.
We recovered that voicemail, and it was a veiled threat to Jeff Zack that he had a short time left and that he better do the right thing.
Investigators want to know, who was this mysterious caller?
She holds nothing back. She says, look, my husband, he was involved in some really shady business.
Here was a guy who had a very bad temper, who had business dealings that had gone south, numerous bad business dealings. So this was a guy who made enemies spontaneously.
He was arrogant, abrasive, and when you deal with a victim that's like that, your investigation is going to go into a bunch of different directions. You have to keep an open mind and follow up on everything.
Detectives learned that one of Jeff's bad business deals led to a heated argument in the weeks before his death.
Jeff and Bonnie's house had wind and rain damage to it, and these two independent contractors were going to repair it. Well, they took the money and then they ended up not doing the work, and Jeff was threatening to turn them over for insurance fraud. And there was exchange of words between them. One of the contractors, we thought, was the one that had threatened him. He remained a suspect up until he took him past the polygraph and was eliminated as a suspect.
When investigators asked friends and family if Jeff had problems with anyone else, one name immediately comes to mind.
He would talk about, this lady. I never knew her, but he would always talk about this certain lady.
Jeff was hardly a monogamous husband. There was a long-time affair with a local woman named Cynthia George.
Cindy George was married to a man who owned a huge restaurant.
I heard of Cynthia George and Ed George because they own Tangiers in Akron, and Tangiers is a pretty prominent place.
They were considered elite in Akron, not the average by any means.
After work, Jeff Zack, he would more or less have reasons to go over there to hang out.
But according to Bonnie, her husband was doing a lot more than just hanging out.
Jeff Zack and Bonnie Zack would be in the Tangiers, and Cynthia would walk by, and just the eye contact alone between them, you could tell there was something going on.
Bonnie was devastated. Cindy pretended to be a good friend of the family and of Jeffrey's, but we all suspected that it was an affair.
Detectives sit down with Bonnie Zack, and they have to empathize with her a little bit. I mean, this woman just lost her husband, the father of her children.
Their affair had also led to other complications.
As Bonnie described the relationship between her late husband and Cynthia George, she disclosed that not only were they lovers, they shared something else in common. They shared a love child. In fact, one of the George's children, who Ed George embraced as his own, was apparently Jeff Zack's offspring.
Coming up, did his wife's infidelity drive Ed George over the edge?
As a jilted husband, he had the motivation to have him taken out.
Detectives in Akron, Ohio have gotten their first lead in the slaying of local businessman Jeff Zack. After speaking with his widow Bonnie, investigators have ruled her out.
They found her to be relatively gracious, relatively honest, did not seem suspicious in any way.
And according to Bonnie, Jeff had been cheating on her with one of the most powerful women in the city, nightclub owner Cynthia George.
In May of 2001, right before the homicide, Bonnie found out about it. Jeff told her that he cut it off.
Could Jeff's killer be his ex-lover or her husband?
Detectives told me that they suspected Ed George as a culprit because he seemed to have a motive. His wife had a child with Jeff Zack. Maybe he felt shame.
As investigators dig deeper into the Georges' marriage, they learned that Ed and Cynthia had always been an odd match.
Cynthia grew up in North Canton, which is south of Akron, and it's kind of a Rust Belt town.
Cynthia George had come from rather humble stock herself. She was the daughter of a coal miner, and the family struggled.
The Georges were wealthier and had the Tangiers restaurant. And I think some of the Georges felt as though Cindy was not good enough for Ed George.
The couple had first met when Cynthia auditioned to become a dancer at the Tangier in 1978. But as soon as Ed laid eyes on her, he had other plans.
Cynthia was Mrs. Ohio runner-up at one time. So here is this beautiful woman kind of gracefully walking throughout this club at night.
She was a strikingly beautiful woman, and Ed was a successful man, and the chemistry seemed to work for them.
Soon they got married. If Cynthia George was looking for a golden ticket, certainly Ed George was it. You know, when investigators look at this, they're like, well, wait a minute. Cynthia George, Ed George, very wealthy, and here's Jeff Zack. He lives in a suburban house. He does not have any money. How does it fit?
After gathering all their information, detectives quite reasonably decided to pay a visit to Cynthia George.
They began asking her questions because she's connected to this victim. You know, she's like, who, me? I've done nothing. I don't know anything.
She did admit that she knew Jeff Zack, but she wouldn't elaborate any more than that.
Cynthia George may not want to talk, but her husband has a lot to say about Jeff Zack.
Ed George wasn't home when investigators first questioned Cynthia. So they go to Ed, and they want to question him. Ed tells this kind of contradictory story to what his wife had told.
He described Jeff Zack as something of a menace. He said that Jeff Zack had been phoning the house, he'd been calling the house and hanging up. To Ed George, he wasn't just a nuisance. Jeff Zack was a harasser.
Now we have two different stories from a married couple who both know the victim. Wow. You got to look further into that.
To find out whether Bonnie Zack's claim about the George's child is true, they request a court order for a DNA sample.
Police wanted to confirm whether this tale about Jeff Zack fathering a child with Cynthia George was indeed true. I mean, at this point, you know, they're hearing information from people, but it's basically gossip.
Cynthia and Ed George are very prominent in the community of Akron. So when this did come out regarding Jeff Zack possibly fathering a child with Cynthia, I mean, it was unbelievable. It was just mind-boggling to people.
Ultimately, police were successful in obtaining a court order to force the George's child to take a paternity test. When the test results came back, it turned out that biologically she was not Ed George's child. She was indeed Jeff Zack's child. At this point, police realized Cynthia George had been carrying around a very weighty secret.
If Ed discovered the truth, it seems plausible that he'd want to take his revenge. But investigators know that isn't the only possibility.
They're thinking, geez, either Cynthia or Ed George could have hired someone to kill Jeff Zack. Or maybe it was Cynthia George herself on that motorcycle who killed Jeff Zack. Maybe it was Ed George.
She had motive for getting rid of Jeff Zack because now there could be a custody battle, and Ed George had motive because if he did know, maybe he was so shamed by this scandal that he wanted to get rid of Jeff Zack.
Coming up, a new suspect unexpectedly enters the picture.
Police get a call, and bang, this thing just opens wide.
Several months into the investigation of Jeff Zach's murder, Akron police are looking into millionaire couple Ed and Cynthia George and their relationship with the victim.
Cynthia and Jeff had a relationship for approximately 7 years. They even had a baby together.
However, detectives still have no hard evidence tying either of them to the crime.
Jeff Zach was a pest. He was a harasser. He was the father of one of the George's children. But there was nothing really beyond that.
Because they don't have enough evidence really to charge Cynthia or Ed George. What do? They've taken it as far as they can go.
I thought the investigation just stopped, for some reason. Then everything came out.
On the 1-year anniversary of Jeff Zach's death, the Akron Beacon Journal publishes an article about the case. It leads to the breakthrough investigators were hoping for.
Shortly after the article ran, a tipster phoned the Akron Police Department and said, "I know who the shooter is."
And that tip comes with a name. John Zaffino. John Zaffino is this kind of short, stocky guy, mustache, slick back hair, a wannabe gangster. If you're looking for a profile of a murderer, John Zaffino, he fits it. But here's a question. Why would John Zaffino murder Jeff Zach?
When investigators track down John Zaffino, he refuses to answer any questions. But his ex-wife is more than willing to talk to police.
It was just a cold case for a year. And then Christine Zaffino, who was John Zaffino's former wife, came forth and said she suspected that John Zaffino and Cindy were involved in the killing of Jeff.
He had told her things that made her suspicious. The police were investigating him.
According to Christine, John Zaffino had admitted to her that he had recently had an altercation with Jeff Zach. And she asked him straight out, "Are you the guy who shot him?" And he said something to the effect of, "Well, let's put it this way. He's going to have a hard time parting his hair from now on."
When detectives play the threatening voicemail on Jeff's answering machine, Christine is absolutely certain it's him.
She said, "No doubt about it. That is the voice of my ex-husband, John Zaffino."
If anybody should be able to recognize his voice, it would be ex-wife.
Christine also has a good idea what his motive might have been.
Even though John Zaffino and Christine Todaro had broken up, she kept track of different occurrences in her ex's life. And she knew that he had been dating a woman who was attractive and older and had money.
And they say, "Well, do you know her name?" She says, "Yeah, I know her name. She's very popular in town. Her name's Cynthia George." So where's the common denominator? Where's the connection between John Zaffino and Jeff Zach? Well, the connection was at the Tangiers. Cynthia George.
This was not a love triangle so much as it was a lover's quadrangle. While Cynthia George was married to Ed George, she was having affairs with both Jeff Zach and police determined John Zaffino.
John was kind of a blue-collar guy. And Cindy originally was a blue-collar woman, so maybe there was this attraction there.
How much she really got deep into a relationship with John Zaffino is possibly still a question. But their relationship developed at least significantly.
At this point, Cynthia is refusing to speak with investigators and does not admit to an affair with John. But DMV records provide detectives with another piece of evidence.
They discovered that, lo and behold, a month before Jeff Zach's death, what had John Zaffino purchased? A motorcycle. Now, not just any motorcycle, a black and lime green motorcycle, like the one seen at the crime scene.
My captain, Beth Doherty, found the motorcycle in Pennsylvania on a publication called Cycle Trader. And that's when Mike Schaefer and I were tasked with going to recover it. We located the bike, and we learned that he had transported there at night. He was desperate to get rid of the motorcycle, and that he wanted to trade it for any car that they had on the lot.
It's enough for police to make an arrest. On September 25th, 2002, they take John Zaffino into custody.
One domino has now fallen in this murder case. But investigators know there will be others.
Coming up, did he kill Jeff Zack to keep Cynthia George to himself? Or was he a hired gun?
Investigators are saying, look, was Cynthia involved? Was Ed involved? Did they pay you to do this?
Investigators in Akron, Ohio have arrested one of Cynthia George's lovers, John Zaffino, for the murder of her other lover, Jeff Zack. But they believe there is still more to the story.
We cleared Ed George of any involvement in this, and Cindy remained a suspect, but we didn't know how much until John Zaffino became a suspect. And then the more he became a suspect, the more the involvement of Cindy was believed.
Under interrogation, John tries to deny everything.
John Zaffino says, I'm totally innocent. I had nothing to do with this. In fact, I was at a car show in Pennsylvania the day the murder occurred. So I have an alibi.
People were located that he supposedly was with and interviewed, and they didn't support his alibi as far as timing. He had enough time to do the murder and travel down there and use that as his alibi, but it didn't hold up.
His phone records proved to be even more incriminating.
Then you look at the phone records immediately after the homicide. Who does he call? He calls Cindy George.
John Zaffino talked to Cynthia George just before Jeff Zack was murdered and just after he was murdered. Now, why would he do that? He would do that for two reasons. One, to say, I'm on my way to kill him, and a second time to say, I just killed him.
Prosecutors offer John a plea agreement in exchange for testimony against Cindy, but still, he refuses to talk.
Obviously, we wanted him to cooperate. He did not do that. So there's two inferences to draw, that Cindy wasn't involved or he's loyal to Cindy and was not going to rat her out.
They could tie John Zaffino directly to the motorcycle, and they knew that his alibi was false. And so they said, all right, let's take this guy to trial.
In February of 2003, almost 2 years after the crime, John Zaffino stands trial for the murder of Jeff Zack.
Even though Cynthia George was not on trial herself, the foundation of the case revolved around Cynthia George. Cynthia George was apparently John Zaffino's motive for committing this murder.
What the prosecution presented was that Cynthia had an affair with Jeff Zack. And when it ultimately ended, Jeff Zack kind of couldn't let it go. That he kept trying to contact Cynthia. Cynthia said, this gentleman's harassing me and I would like you to take care of it. And allegedly John did.
They even put Cynthia George herself on the witness stand.
Cynthia was called as a witness to his trial.
She pleads the fifth. Why would you do that? You would do that if you had things to hide. You would do that if you thought what I say is going to get me in trouble.
For the jury, Cynthia's silence is just as incriminating as anything she could have said.
On March 11th, 2003, John Zaffino was found guilty of murder.
He was given life with, I believe, his first opportunity for a parole hearing would be 23 years later.
He's sent away forever on a murder charge. Now, what will that do to John Zaffino?
Still, John refuses to talk.
We were hoping that John Zaffino would testify against Cindy. That just never occurred.
The public sentiment by the end of 2004 was that Cynthia George was the mastermind of this murder. Everybody was talking about that.
It was horrible. And I did some interviews purposely because I wanted it out there that I felt Cindy was involved.
It isn't until the following year that investigators feel they have enough evidence to finally prosecute her.
The big break was that John Zaffino and Cynthia George were talking. There were calls from the prison to her that were recorded. And those calls started to reveal that perhaps there was a conspiracy here to commit murder, that Cynthia was involved. The prosecution believes that Cynthia George was basically paying money to John Zaffino. And John was dangling over her head with this ambiguous threat, if you will, that he was going to drop a dime on her at any moment if she didn't pay.
On January 10th, 2005, Cynthia George is placed under arrest.
Police moved in on Cynthia George as she was shopping. She was arrested very publicly in a very public place.
The reason for it was twofold. One, they wanted to make a statement to the town, to the city, that they never gave up on this case. Number two, they wanted to put fear into Cynthia, to let her know that, listen, you're not above the law.
The police called me to tell me that they had indicted Cindy and that they arrested her, and I was ecstatic.
Coming up, will Cynthia George be convicted, or will wealth and power help get her off the hook for murder?
If you got money, you can buy your way out of most of anything.
More than 4 years after Jeff Zack was killed, Akron millionaire Cynthia George stands trial for conspiracy to commit his murder.
This case attracted a lot of interest in the city of Akron.
This case had everything, really, that the public ate up. Affairs, illegitimate child, wealthy people.
Due to the widespread media coverage, Cynthia's lawyers make a surprising request.
Cindy was afraid that maybe that publicity would have affected the jury.
Rather than being tried by a jury of her peers, she decided to have a bench trial, which meant her fate would be decided by a judge.
The old adage is everybody wants a fair trial as long as it's in their favor.
On November 14th, 2005, prosecutors make their opening arguments before the judge.
The prosecution had some concerns because they didn't have really John Zaffino saying, yeah, she told me to kill him. But what they did have is they had a lot of document evidence, meaning they could show money changing hands.
When authorities accessed the financial records, they discovered that a month or so before the murder, $5,300 had come out of Cynthia George's account, and approximately $5,300 had been used to purchase the motorcycle that was used to kill Jeff Zack.
It was just too coincidental, all of the bank statements that matched what was out of Cynthia's account to the penny.
They also draw attention to the communication between Cynthia George and John Zaffino at the time of the shooting.
Remember the phone calls? The phone call before the murder and the phone call after the murder. Was that a coincidence?
I was very happy because I knew evidence was coming out against her and that she would probably be found guilty.
However, Cynthia never admits to an affair with John, and the defense argues the state's evidence is purely circumstantial.
Even though you could imply that Cynthia George may have been involved in this case, there was no concrete evidence that she was the puppeteer in all this. In fact, it was entirely possible that John Zaffino, who was a bit of a hothead, decided to kill Jeff Zack on his own.
Those records don't prove that Cynthia knew what he was going to use that motorcycle for.
On November 28th, the court reconvenes to hear the judge's decision.
Everybody reassembled in the courtroom. Cynthia George stood up, she faced the judge, and the judge said, "I have rendered my verdict."
She was found guilty. I was very satisfied.
Cynthia George was sentenced to life in prison. You can hear her family wailing in the courtroom, and it's pretty heartbreaking.
Her family became hysterical, but I, of course, was happy. I felt that justice was served.
Cynthia wastes no time in submitting an appeal.
The conviction of Cynthia George was appealed up to the 9th District Court of Appeals, alleging errors occurred at the trial court level, which caused her to be found guilty.
She hired the best appellate lawyers she could get. And, the thing is, it's very, very unlikely that an appellate court would overturn a murder conviction. So she was not facing an uphill battle. She was facing Mount Everest here.
But a year and a half later, she achieves what many believe to be impossible.
On March 21st, 2007, the charges against Cynthia George were dismissed by the Court of Appeals.
That appeal decision just really blew everybody involved in this case away. Really did.
When you read their opinion, they wanted evidence of solicitation and procure. They wanted a conversation from the state where Cynthia George is asking John Zaffino to commit the murder. We did not have that. We had solely circumstantial evidence.
After her release, the George family releases a statement saying their faith had sustained them and that they are moving forward with their lives as a family.
Last I heard, Cynthia George was, living the happy, elite life with her husband and her kids, who are all grown now.
In my eyes, Cynthia George got away with murder.
It's a sentiment shared by many in the city of Akron. Many felt that a woman of wealth and privilege seemed to have taken revenge on a former lover, something Cynthia George has always denied.
Do I think the George's money, status, and standing in the community had anything to do with that verdict being overturned? Hell yeah, I do.
Cindy had the benefit of great attorneys. She got top legal help in this case.
The fact that she got out after 16 months kind of upset me, and I miss them horribly. It was horrible loss. It took a lot of years of pain and anguish. I don't think anybody suffers as much as a mother.
哥多少钱？60块钱往返炸酱面。哎，咱这有40级的哥们儿喊个喇叭吗？随滨看大海，或者滨发秦皇岛，帮我喊个喇叭行吗？40级大哥。
Wonder if I could bring them to live. I could bring my lover. And baby, you make me wait. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. Waiting you back there again. Play the music back there again. I saw the looking out of the window. Wonder if I could bring them down. If I could bring my love now, baby, you make.
Shorty, if you really wanna go, baby, then you gotta take me the mess. I tried to soak in all the years and take it all in, but I come up for a breath and cry. I gave my drama, gave my simple, gave my friends a helping hand. I bet you know that they are dead. I wish I could tell you this. The more we talk, the talk is not a time.